Dr. Bloomgarden, thank you for joining us on Capital and Power.
Adam, so glad to be here joining you today and to meet you.
All right, so I'm going to start with something that's really simple. How does someone with a PhD in political science wind up as the CEO of a major marketing and public relations communications firm?
You know, that's a really good question, but actually, intuitively, they're very aligned. Because what is politics about? Politics is about relationship building. It's about building bridges. It's about building understanding communities of joined and common interests. And what is marketing and communications about? It's building bridges between people. And even more so today, I feel that public relations and communication has a really important mandate for bringing people together and for responding to communities. So I think there's alignment. I'm grateful for my background and my training.
We're going to talk about innovation. We're going to talk about leadership. These are topics that are key for you. But what would you say to the naysayers who dismiss public relations? I've relied on the people who are in public relations when I was a journalist to help me do my job and to do it better than if I didn't have access to them. What do you say to the naysayers who look down on public relations?
Yeah, I think there's always been a bit of friction about what public relations really means. So public relations is really about sharing information and finding great stories that inspire people. We all lead our lives from the beginning of time through storytelling and through trust in people. And I think that what public relations does is find those stories, develop content in an engaging and meaningful way, and then being able to share it with people so it inspires them. And I think that's a great profession to be in. I'm really glad to be in the PR field.
So something that you've pointed out, and we're going to talk about AI and the way it's making changes. But it seems as if the world is going to change very quickly, and everything about how we live, work, and play is going to change. How do you interpret that?
So I think, first of all, lucky you that you're doing a podcast on the topic of AI, because it's going to change the world and it's going to affect every single person. And I saw this comment recently where intelligence on tap is going to be changing the blueprint for every CEO and for every business. So that's really what it's about. It's intelligence on tap. And I think when you go back to the books we all learned, years ago, Clay Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, that's really at the heart of it, because we always used to think that continuous innovation meant innovation that made one improvement on top of another, sustainable innovation, as it's called. But actually, we're in a world of disruptive innovation. And that means that where we really are going to make progress, and what we all need to think about in whatever field we're in and in our lives, is how we can adapt to disruptive innovation.
Can you help me understand the difference between sustainable innovation and disruptive innovation? I live in disruptive innovation, and I came out of what was sustainable. But I'm curious what the official difference is.
Okay, let me give you a perfect example that you hold in your hand and deal with all day long, your Apple phone. So every time we get a new Apple phone that comes out each fall, everyone says, oh, is it any better? Well, yeah, it's better. Maybe the camera's a little better. Maybe, there's something, button that's in a different place. It makes it easier for you. But when the phone goes away and you're just going to be using voice or a pin that you have on your jacket, and that you won't be holding something in your hand any longer, which people hypothesize is coming, that's going to be disruptive innovation. Complete, total change from the way you do something.
How within your own offices, how do you use disruptive innovation?
We really try to think about that all the time, actually. And when I get a program, if we're working with, a client and they are posing a challenge, or we're thinking about an annual plan, and then people come and they share it with me and we discuss it. And I say, if you could have written this plan last year, it's not good enough. So we always have to be thinking about those words, that we have to really be adding something new and different all the time, because we're in a world where it's not like, I get AI, I've reached the end of my journey, I'm going to be upskilled to be able to actually use AI perfectly in everything I do, because we are at the beginning of this journey. And as we've heard from the great tech leadership of many, many tech companies, this is just a start. So we're going to have to get used to changing, adapting, trying, piloting, experimenting and failing with what we do. Because
but when you say the word failing,
yes.
how do you interpret that word, failing?
Well, there's many ways you can personally fail, and I do this all the time when I try to actually upload some text and turn it into a podcast. And the first time I tried to do that, I failed. But I keep trying it, and I'm going to master it very shortly. But failing also can mean that you're going to attempt to market a product that maybe didn't fit customer needs or demands. So, did you correctly read, insights from customers? Did you correctly introduce it to the right communities or to the right customer base? So I think that there's lots of ways to fail, and there's nothing wrong with failing. I mean, one thing about the U.S. business community, and I see this every time I go to Davos, is that failure is good. If you haven't failed, you haven't tried. Whereas in many parts of the world, many cultures, failure is bad, and it's not something that you want to hide rather than something that you want to celebrate.
Is that something uniquely American, or is that more of is that something that's uniquely true to the capitalist world, that being able to fail and pick yourself up plants the seeds for tomorrow's success?
I would say that that's a hard thing to answer, but I would guess from my point of view that it is uniquely American.
So in your experience, because you've been CEO at Reuter Finn, your client base, I would imagine, and you can name clients if you wish. I would not expect that because you probably have, there are rules of engagement. But it's the gamut. I know that you've had CEOs of successful startups. I would imagine you have mid-cap companies, you have large-cap companies. Do you have, I would imagine, 2 Fortune 500 companies?
Yes, we do. We cover the gamut of company size and regional focus.
So when a CEO says to you, I understand the need to focus on what's coming, that everything is changing, but I have an obligation to my shareholders to maintain the engine that is producing the returns and the earnings per share. How do you balance that?
Yeah, so I think that's a very, very important question because there's been a lot of discussion about AI being talked about, AI being adopted, with very little to show in terms of bottom line impact. But I would argue that that's actually because storytelling hasn't yet progressed. Because with our clients, with many of our clients, we do have concrete results. Manufacturing lines that are more precise, shortages that are averted, R&D efforts in pharma that are accelerated, clinical trial recruitment that's accelerated. So there's really, really big impacts for using AI. And I think the problem is that we haven't actually found all these stories and told them effectively so people begin to understand, because you need to do that for shareholders.
How do you change the narrative? Because I know that the fear narrative is quite big in legacy media. We hear that the bottom is dropping out of the job market. Entry-level jobs are being, entry-level jobs are being replaced by AI. How do you change that narrative? There's a New York Times article that talks about what AI jobs might exist in the future, but no guarantee.
Yeah. So if you put your head in the sand and say, I'm not going to adopt AI, you will disappear. So progress in technology can't be stopped. The question is, where is it going to? And that's where there's this question of disruptive innovation. And you are a perfect example of it, because podcasts have become hugely popular. And that is because legacy media is changing its position in terms of where people get their information or their storytelling. And podcasts have become a rage. There's also the question of new online outlets. There's, the free press, there's Axios, Politico that didn't exist before. So I think that really the question is basically, again, back to how do we innovate? And it's our responsibility to do that, not just to add better online viewers of the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. There's much more to it than just that.
Yeah, I don't know if this is still true, but I read an article maybe 6 months ago. The New York Times does not make money off of its news creation. It makes money off of its games and its cooking section and those sections. As a CEO of a firm that is advising companies, what is it that CEOs might miss? Because I think the majority of people think the New York Times makes money on news, and it doesn't.
Well, I actually have worked for a very long time with one of my very, very favorite CEOs, John Chambers, who is the former chairman and CEO of Cisco, and now has interest and has been mentoring 22 or more startups. And he once said to me when I first started working with him now over 10 years ago, he said, Kathy, what is the worst thing you can be doing? And I thought to myself, oh my God, what's the worst thing I could be doing? Well, not fixing a problem, right? Isn't that what you would think? He said, no, doing the right thing for too long. So I thought to myself, wow, that is so smart. That is so incredible. And I've remembered it ever since, because I think that that is really something that we all have to think about as we think about how to advise people how to adapt and change. Is that just because something like news for the New York Times is so effective in shaping opinion, it doesn't mean that that will be the key determining variable that's going to influence the way people absorb information for the future. So I think that we really have to think hard when we look at, a portfolio of businesses, what is really going to be, where's the future going to be, and not just what's been successful in the past.
I'm not insinuating or asking if Apple is a client, but if Tim Cook were sitting in your office and the criticism right now, and I love my Apple devices, I'm recording you on an Apple device. I use Apple every day. But the criticism seems to be you haven't done anything new in a long time, which seems to fall into what you just said. But how do you, because Apple can't jeopardize its profits, how do you get a Tim Cook and an Apple to look at where, I think the quote your team sent me is, competing against where the market is going,
yes,
not your competitors?
Yeah, that was another, again, give all full credit to John Chambers for that as well, because he also said, think about your competition. Where is your competition? Your competition is not the competitors in your industry. Your competition is a market transition. You're always going to compete against a market transition. So if we really think about an Apple or any one of the big tech players, it's really about the change of disruptive innovation. We talked about voice replacing phone. That could be an area where Apple, no doubt, is already exploring options and really developing their own pilots. But there are many more spaces that they could look at where things are going to really dramatically shift. And that is really where I'm quite certain that they're actually looking already.
Well, when we talk about, again, Mr. Chambers, the worst thing you can do is keep doing what works for too long. And yet, things that work, you don't want to discard them. Is that statement, is that saying discard?
No, of course not. It just means don't be complacent. You really can't just sit back on your laurels and, decide that you're doing fine and the strength of core business is going to carry you through. You really have to always, again, be looking at how the market's going to shift.
So I want to go back to the last century. Your LinkedIn profile talks about being at Reuter Finn since 1999. What was the best advice and what was perhaps not so great advice you got prior to joining Reuter Finn and prior to completing your PhD in political science?
So I think you have to follow your passion, because when I joined Reuter Finn, it was because I was first doing data coding, and I loved at Columbia, where I got my doctorate in poli-sci, was very heavy statistics oriented. We had quite a lot we had to actually matriculate in, and I did all the coding and computer coding for our research projects. And it was really a question of next seeing, where else would be of interest for me in my career to really develop capabilities for the agency and also for communication. And that's why I opened the China office before any PR agencies really were present in China. And then also healthcare, which was not a really big area for communications at that time, both of which were passions of mine personally. So
that was good advice then. Follow your passion. Because I Scott Galloway, he actually dismisses that and says, it's great if you can find something that allows you to pay the bills and follow your passion, but if you can't, you got to pay the bills. What would you say to him?
Well, I would say that actually, following your passion, there's a high likelihood that you're going to innovate. And if you're going to innovate, then you're going to be successful. And again, willing to fail, being smart about, the business model you're pursuing, of course. But you've got to stick at it. It's a hard road. It's a really hard road when nothing has existed before. But I still believe that if you don't love what you're doing, you're not going to excel in it. So I think that he's a little bit wrong. I wouldn't go up and doubt him, but I would just say that from I'm a personal example of following your passion actually works. Yes, I get up and start all over again when you fall down. All of us are going to fall down, and if you haven't fallen down, you haven't tried hard enough. Well, I don't know that's routinely the case. Of course, there are all kinds of management styles, and there are all kinds of structures of bureaucracy within companies. But I think that I know one company we had worked for did this amazing thing, which again I always remembered. I thought it was fantastic to celebrate a failure. So when a person gave up their project because their project wasn't actually delivering or achieving the goals or the KPIs that had been set up, and they would step forward and they offered to close that project and give resources to another colleague who was actually in a project that was producing better or faster results. So they celebrated that person who did that. They celebrated the person that failed to encourage people to come forward. So I think there's a culture issue here, and maybe it's really important for all of us in internal. We do a lot of internal communications. It's important for us in internal communications to encourage that kind of behavior because it actually strengthens the organization.
Among your clients, are they, do you think, following a model of lead by collaboration, lead by consensus, or another model? And do you see a difference between collaboration and consensus?
Oh, absolutely. I think you can have a discussion, but then you have to take a decision, and then you have to move forward. And I think that what happens sometimes in a consensual decision by consensus organization is that oftentimes there can be a circular process where decisions just aren't made quite as rapidly, or decisions aren't as steadfast in terms of how you move forward. So I would say that that can be a risk for consensual decision making. But if you look at collaboration, I think that's even more important today. You see more and more tendency toward flatter organizations, not so many hierarchies, particularly if the CEO now has access to intelligence on tap, real-time data, because then you don't need layers of people to interpret it for you. So then you can actually interact and have direct reports that are many more than, let's say, in previous, organizational structures. Mm-hmm.
You have a coding background.
Yes.
So I want to ask you about data and something you created. I had a conversation with friends. We were talking politics. And everybody, when they talk politics, I have come to believe when people talk politics, they're not talking data. They're talking emotion, which is fine. Without emotion, you don't have passion, you don't have buy-in. But you've got to remember at some point, what does the data tell us? And I bring that up because you launched is it called the RF Tech Lab?
Yes.
What is the RF Tech Lab and how does it give your clients an advantage?
Yeah, so the RF Tech Lab is hugely important for us because it is constantly looking at the innovation ecosystem that supports the communication business. And then we pilot certain things and we determine whether they're actually useful and how we could actually amend it or actually adjust it to meet our client needs. So, for example, we have now very early on been experimenting and developed a tool for how LLMs, how large language models actually collect and aggregate information. So that well before it's been now highly publicized that Google search is actually becoming less of a used tool in favor of ChatGPT or Perplexity or some of these others, which will change the way we find information. So if you today or I go or my kids go to look for, what is Apple going to bring out next year in terms of a new, innovation, it's not actually what the Google search tells you, and you can click on the links and decide which is credible and which do you like better, et cetera. It's actually a summary that the AAI, that LLM has generated, which summarizes for you just what all of those sources might have said, but it doesn't rank the sources in terms of authority. So, NerdWallet or, or any one of these Tom's Hardware has equal presence in that kind of an AI generated search as with the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah. I was blown away. I had an opportunity to continue in a traditional career path for what I was doing for many years, or go AI. And 2 years ago, I said, you know what? I'm going AI. I'm blown away by just within 2 years how it's changed. I was trained by my first firm how to be a prompt engineer and write prompts. But now I've seen that it's changed where you don't have to be a prompt engineer. You just have to be skilled at guiding the playground, whether it's ChatGPT or whichever Gemini, to the output with the various, I always call them the validation prompts, because AI is still like your 6-year-old. When you say, I want you to draw a flower, you need to say on a piece of paper, not on the wall, not on a couch. But I see how it makes me more efficient. What blows you away about the revolution that's underway right now?
Well, I saw something really beautiful so I'm amazed, and I'm like a child when I see all these new AI generated tools that are coming to the fore. But I actually went online and I saw how Coach is using digital twins to test case new handbag designs. So I thought, wow, that is so amazing, because first of all, it cuts the time and it actually allows the customers to engage and to provide input into whether they like that design, they don't like that design. They can actually change it in terms of colors or design patterns or whatever. So I think that this kind of very, very targeted precision marketing is going to be just an amazing experience. And there's also more increasing use of like multi-sensual kind of, like you'll put an AI will put on an image and you'll actually, let's say it's a car, you'll feel, not only will you see it and you can change the colors and whatever, but you'll feel the vibration of the car, hear the sound. So it's really opening up completely new possibilities.
How would you describe it, Ruder Finn? Are you folk on the cutting edge of using AI for your clients? Are you testing things with AI that you're not sharing with clients yet, or are they allowing you to use them as the test case?
Well, so our philosophy is, as I said earlier, was to bring and stimulate discussion and push people's boundaries. I always say I have not done my job if I haven't suggested certain things to you that you don't want to do, because then I'm not introducing or pushing boundaries enough for you to consider what's possible. So we'll tell you what we can do. We'll tell you what we see other people are doing. We'll tell you what's coming next. And then we'll see what fits for you in terms of your marketing strategy, in terms of your, wanting to use certain tools.
So if a 17-year-old was thinking of getting a degree in marketing, what would you say to that 17-year-old?
To get into green marketing?
Yeah, degree in marketing or in public relations.
Yeah.
How would you advise them?
I think it's a really great field. I think there are lots of fields that people are actually concerned about, but I think that communications is a really great place to be. And as the whole advertising agency shifts as well, I think public relations, which tends to have lower cost budgets, will gain, I think, in the marketing mix.
Do you think that AI you use the term storytelling, and that's the key to anything. It's the human connection, the emotional connection. I've seen AI write some pretty emotional things. Do you think that it could replace that human connection soon?
Well, if you go back to that article that you referred to at the beginning of the 22 jobs that are going to actually come, I think that the human is never going to be replaced, but the human is going to do more. And I think it's a really good example over the past day or two, contrasting, sort of models. So Amazon, of course, as you saw, announced that they're going to do some significant layoffs, and that AI will be driving some of their decision making in the layoff process. And the Wall Street Journal asked the CEO of Reddit, "And what about, will you be doing the same?" And he said, "No, we don't see AI as replacing our staff. Our engineers always want to do more than they have time for. And so we see AI enabling our engineers." And I think that's the way to look at it. It's really to look at it from the point of view of it will empower us to do more. But it's your mindset. You go into this, it's the company's culture, it's the strategy of the CEO and the leadership. You can do more. You can take this AI and make it a very powerful tool, or it will in some ways overcome you.
So if Satya Nadella was sitting in your office he's announced that very publicly they've had layoffs at Microsoft. 30% of code where you started
Yes.
is now written by AI, and that's only going to grow. What would you say to him that he should be saying to either his staff or his customers about
Yep.
what this means?
So I think that they've done a fantastic job in pivoting. So I think that his announcement, if I read it correctly, is not that they're reducing staff, but they're actually shifting resources. So they may be eliminating some jobs, but I believe that they're actually increasing their resources in the more AI-oriented functions. And, our agency, for example, we're Microsoft Outlook. We use Copilot. It's been really fantastic for us. We use it now routinely. So I think that they've been very, very thoughtful about introducing and changing their model so that they are integrating AI into everything they do.
I want to talk about young people because leadership is about grooming the next generation to take over. How would you advise doing that in the current environment? By the way, I'm going to betray a bias. I think that I don't know what generation they're called anymore, but the 20-somethings that I've worked with over the last two AI jobs have been very hardworking, incredibly intelligent people. So I think that society, it might be the old, as they would say in Yiddish, the Aldecockers, dismiss the younger group far too willingly.
So I'm with you 100%. I think the hugest, biggest mistake that companies can make is to not hire young people who are graduating today. And I saw that data came out recently that it's so hard for graduates to find jobs. And I thought to myself, wow, that is a huge miss. What a massive miss, because that is where the innovation is going to come from. They're very, AI native. They know how to do everything. They experiment. They're creative, as you said, hardworking. And I think that is critically important to being able to, where is innovation going to come from? It's really critically important that we have these young people that are part of the organization, every organization.
Drawing upon your political science background, is the United States, I'm going to be myopic to just North America. And when I say North America, I mean the US, not Canada. I don't want to talk about Mexico. Does the society accept the fact that what you just said, bringing in younger people just for new ideas, is reason enough to create a position? Or do we dismiss that with, no, if you're not making a widget for part A, I don't need you?
Well, I heard something in Davos that stuck with me forever. It was actually from Zach Cass, who's actually our formerly OpenAI and head of our AI advisory council. He was giving a talk and he said, never hire someone for a job. I thought to myself, wow, how weird is that, right? Never hire someone for a job. What else do you do, right? I hire tons of people always thinking about, is this person the right person for the job? He said, because that job will change. So what you need to hire people for is people who are flexible, people who are adaptable, so that they can actually shift easily and become in a new position. And I thought that was so smart. So I think the answer to your question is, I think we really have to realize that as these job definitions shift, we're going to increasingly prioritize skills like adaptability and flexibility, and not just having learned how to do a one set of activities that define a job.
Are there any parts of our world where AI just will not be able to integrate or move in?
Well, I think it's hard to say at the moment. I don't see that as totally possibility. I think it's going to actually touch everything. But I do think there's one thing to keep in mind. Back to your question about young people, I saw this survey that just came out from Gallup late last year that said that the most important thing that people want from leaders, and what you would have thought would have been trust, right? Trust is the thing that people always talk about, but it wasn't trust. It was actually hope and optimism. So that more than half of people ranked that as the most important factor, and only about a third, roughly, were ranking trust as important. So I think there's a shift here in terms of what we're looking at. It's that AI and the way we manage it really needs to be looking at that part of the glass half full that says we need to find the way that this is going to unlock power, energy, creativity, innovation, make people's lives better. It's not like it's written in sand today that that's how it's done. It's going to be something that's going to be an ongoing challenge, and that is going to be our responsibility to actually find that, because that's what people want, the hope and optimism for the future.
When you talk about hope and optimism, I want to bring up Davos. I can remember a time when the the financial world, and for that matter, I guess just regular consumers of information. Look to Davos as a gathering of some of the most successful, the brightest, all of that. And then there was a shift. And there's this undercurrent of negativity toward what I guess we would call elite, the elite, whether the elite are there if they were, the privilege of inheriting, that's great. But it's really the elite who have earned it, whether it's the degree or have built something successful. How do you counter that negative emotion? Because when you brought up Davos, I can think of all of the negative things I hear about Davos these days, not the positive things.
Yeah, well, I think that's really true. I think that there's a lot of merit for some of that conversation, but it's the one place you can go and meet a ton of people really quickly over a several day period that you really would have to travel or make appointments. It would take forever or never to set up the same, sort of touch bases, and you learn a lot from that. It's really not the things that happen in the Congress Hall at Davos. It's those conversations, those casual meet and greets that actually expand your boundaries and make you think differently and meet people from like every part of the world and from every vertical. So I think it is really it's unique in that way. Who knows? Maybe there'll be another forum or event. There are some forums that are now trying to match or maybe even take the place of Davos. And maybe that will happen. But for the moment, I think it's one of the few places that you can go and do that.
But that's that human connection we were talking about. That AI, I think AI is an incredible tool. I think AI will replace a lot of positions as far as things that get done. But you can never change my ability to pick the phone up and getting the guy who does my financial advising. Talking to, his first name is Tony. When I talk to Tony, it's a far better experience and I get blown away by AI agents that let me ask natural language queries regarding investment choices. But what I realize is that the agent is data chunking and is just giving me output that I would never have the ability to analyze. But I can't have that conversation with AI that I can have with an individual who I've known for 20 years. Well,
you know what? It makes you smarter in talking to him, though, because you would do your research in advance and you would find out, should I be more active in bonds? Should I be, and why? Should I be thinking about foreign stocks because the U.S. looks like a bit bumpy right at the moment? Is, tech going to really continue to drive the stock market, or are we at the end of that curve? You can be really an informed questioner of Tony, and come away much better, taking much more from that conversation than if you just got Tony on the phone and started asking him all these questions. But so I think it's that, go back to that, it empowers you. It doesn't replace your discussion with Tony. In fact, it makes your discussion with Tony more effective.
You also brought up, when you were talking about your background experience with China.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, as you watch AI evolve, do you think any one nation is leading? Is it the United States, or we all got, there was a clutch the pearls moment for tech engineers when DeepSeek came. I keep calling it Deep Think, out of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but the answer is 44, or something like that. Is someone leading? Do you think the United States is leading? Do you think China's leading, or is there something we're not seeing?
Well, so I'm a big believer, based on my background and my political science training as well, in collaboration, because China has advanced tremendously in terms of their technological expertise. The number of engineering, MBAs coming out of China is truly astonishing. And if you look today at those who are, leading our big tech firms or the greatest minds in AI, I always think of Fei Li at Stanford as heading the AI lab. They really, they often will have Chinese background. But the thing is that, if we look to, everyone is specialized and expert in certain areas, right? So in EVs, for example, you have batteries, you have, rare earth minerals, you have wind and solar. These things really are the best in the world in China. But we're learning and we're picking that up. But we're best in the world in certain other quantum computing and things like that. So if you bring the two together, if there is a collaboration, you really can advance things. We're at a bit of a bumpy patch right at the moment in terms of, being concerned about security and trying to figure all that out. But I think it's not a question of one better than the other. I think it's really that both countries are extremely advanced in their technological expertise and have a bit of a different focus in terms of where they excel.
Walk me through the experience when a CEO comes to talk to you, not yet a client, but is considering bringing you aboard. What are some of the questions they ask you? And what are some of the things you provide them?
So the first question really is, to get them out of their box and to really get a feeling of how they're being perceived. And again, you can do an LLM search, and we've done this many times, and people are just a little bit shocked for what comes up, because they're putting out quite a lot of content, and of course their teams are telling them that the content is being picked up, and it is, I'm sure. But the thing is, the overall impression from the outside may not match what it is that they're actually hoping to convey. So I think the first question is, totally objectively from the outside, how are they being perceived? And the second question is, how do they actually get their story of nowadays mostly strategy pivots? It may be changing their business portfolio. It may be shifting resources. It may be, reinforcing their pipeline. It's really a question of getting all of those key elements out really effectively so that people truly understand what leadership in the company are actually doing in terms of what they see as their path forward. Back to your question about shareholders and keeping shareholders happy. Or it may be marketing. Sometimes it's a marketing focus that they would really like to make sure that they excel in a certain area of their vertical market.
When you talk about hope and is part of leadership, I had a discussion years ago. I was at Fox Business. I interviewed Kevin Roberts, who I think was at Saatchi & Saatchi at the time. And I think he was the one who originated a term, love marks, that within your product, is there something the customer loves? And he said to me, the consumer will forgive you for a mistake if they love the product.
Yes.
Does that still hold true? Was that true, or was that just a philosophy?
No, I think for me, that's totally true, because you and I both believe in the passion of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the loyalty you can generate for a product. So if the product is something which truly meets a customer need, and if the quality that you focus on and the innovation that you continue to use in providing that to the customer, they are likely, hopefully, going to get in love with your product. And then I think that through thick and thin, absolutely who's right, customers will forgive you, or if you have a dip.
And so, given your wealth of experience over the last 2 decades in all of this, when I asked you the question about good advice, I purposely avoided saying bad advice, because someone's bad advice might be someone's good advice. But advice that you did, that in your history or in your past, does anything come to mind that you thought, that wasn't the right way, and would you be willing to share that with us?
Well, I think that just going with the crowd is a bad idea. I constantly am sort of fighting against that sometimes in our agency too, and just say, let's just do what we think is right. And let's just ask ourselves that question over and over again. Is this the right thing to do? Whether to generate more sales, whether to reach a certain customer, whether to, support a CEO. But there's always this trend, and it's like everybody's doing it, right? There's the everybody doing it thing. And we need to make sure that our capabilities match. Back to the question of who's your competitor. It's not, again, matching the crowd or just following the crowd. I think it's really making sure that you truly and deeply believe in what you're doing, and that you're passionate about it, and then you'll succeed.
Your team, when I was preparing to talk with you, shared something with me, and it was a strategy for success. And they brought up the example of partnerships. I always say the name wrong, but Sanofi and McLaren. Oh, I got it right. McLaren I can get because I'm a car nut. What did they do, and what are the real world implications for those of us who might not be owners of F1s or purchasers of Sanofi software? But what is it they did, and how could I, as a CEO who might be watching us, learn from that?
Okay, this is a hugely important question. Actually, it's the center of bringing together everything we've talked about. Because number one, the CEO was driving this. And I think it's very important that leadership has a voice, and leadership is really the one who's actually encouraging people to come on board. Because the idea of having a race car driver go to the manufacturing floor and talk to a manufacturing employee who probably has been or maybe working for quite some years on that assembly line, and tell him what to do, it probably would raise some eyebrows. But you know what? It was magical because you start to think about, and I never thought about a race car and how many sensors they have in a race car and how every second, every minute, the precision you have to really give to that kind of detail determines whether you win the race. And they brought that same conversation to the assembly line and really talked about how if you shaved off a couple of points, if you just paid a little bit more attention to AR sensors that were put on, you would actually improve quality output, you would actually improve production, and you would improve the whole functioning of the assembly line. And the fun that came from it, from this unorthodox kind of partnership. I think we all need to think about these unorthodox collaborations because they really wake you up and make you think differently, back to that disruptive innovation. And it really, it generated excitement, enthusiasm. And the race car drivers were saying, wow, we're in entertainment. It's amazing that we have the chance to actually help people. We can actually help people and improve their health. That was so inspiring for us. So on both sides, on all sides, it generated this energy that you can only get from some kind of an unorthodox collaboration like that. But it was really the CEO who drove it. And I think it tells you a little bit about how leadership needs to interact and engage in these kind of disruptive innovation activities.
Question you don't have to answer if you don't want to. My mom was a divorce attorney and on occasion would fire a client. Have you ever had to fire a client?
You know, yes, we have. If there's not a good chemistry match, I think, like you said, relationships are critically important. And I think we really want to love our clients. We do. It sounds maybe kind of silly, but, you know, we really like to get up in the morning on weekends, just mull over, you know, what can we be doing differently? And have that real sense of excitement about helping a client. In today's world, it's really important that you're really seen as like supporting each other, that you're a partnership and not just like a vendor delivering an X. So I think that sometimes if there's not that good chemistry, then it might not be the best relationship.
Yeah, it's about alignment. I used the word fired, which has a negative connotation. But look, if it's not working for one, it's probably not working for the other. And it's probably best not to go forward. When it is working, how do you assess? Because businesses love key performance indicators. You know, what's your KPI? What's your KPI? Is that the best way to gauge performance? Because we are data dependent.
Yeah, I think KPIs are very important. I think they're getting increasingly important because now, PR never used to have very good KPIs. So, you know, get a Wall Street Journal article, X impressions, so what, right? But I think that what we really try more and more is to, what is your objective? What is the objective we're trying to achieve? And let's make sure we have a very hard, concrete KPI that we can measure because our clients are on the line. You know, if you're in a corporation where there's a lot of pressure for AI redundancies, et cetera, you need to prove and document that you're actually delivering benefit to the company and to the business. That softness, activity level is, lesser importance, I would say today, than really, really helping the business advance in a meaningful way and providing, again, that innovation, that excitement internally to employees so that the company can excel.
So I want to step out of the C-suite office and ask you this question. Was there a moment you can share with us where you might have had more than just, we all go through self-doubt, but I'm talking about tremendous, this is not right. And how did you get through that moment?
Well, I always doubt myself many times. And, I really like to sort of make sure that I'm not emotionally responding to something and just pause and say to myself, let me look at a couple of other scenarios that are similar. And let me also ask a few third parties that I really, am close to outside our organization for advice so that I can make sure that my judgment and my, way forward has been very measured in terms of what I've thought through and what I thought about.
Do you have any, and again, you don't share names, but CEOs, they have such incredible pressure on them. And I would suspect the CEO to be most feared and to stay away from is the one who's absolutely sure. Or am I wrong?
No, I think that the CEO to stay away from is the CEO who's not engaged, actually. And because, CEOs who have a passion and who are really driven and who are very demanding can actually help you deliver a lot more. And at the end of the day, it's like, the stern headmaster in your school, you excelled, you really drive yourself to get all A's. So I think that that's not a bad thing. Of course, anything can be extreme, but I think it's, if you don't have someone who's, clear about where they're headed, what they want and where the company's going, especially in uncertain times, I think it's hard to deliver. So I think that that's not a question of fear. It's a question of doing a great job. I want our clients to say, wow, Bruderfin has been an amazing partner. And in order to do that, I need to be totally in their head. I need to understand what they need. I need to understand where they want to go. And unless I can do that, I'm operating outside the circle, and I'm not likely to deliver the best, absolute, amazing work for them.
Are you 24/7 on the job, or do you take time for yourself and for the people in your work, world outside the office?
I'm so 24/7, but I actually have one must do. I swim. I swim a mile every day, and when I swim, I'm thinking through in my head, what didn't I do? And I keep my phone next to the pool so that I can, when I get out, I have my list of things that I have to make sure that I actually do. For some reason, when I'm swimming, all these things come back to me about, oh, I didn't do that. I meant to do that, and then I try to remember all the points that I need to, address when I get out.
I was a swimmer years ago. I won't swim in New York City because the public pools terrify me.
Yes.
So I walk now. I'll do a 1 hour, 4 mile walk.
Yes.
And I'm curious, your CEOs, do you see that kind of making time? I'm not talking about the physical activity as a necessity. I'm talking about the ability to not be distracted and just be one with your thoughts as you're doing something. Do the successful ones do that on a regular basis?
Yeah, I think they do. I think that there's, depending on the region of the world, some people do it during a religious holiday. Some people do it, during the European summer break. Some people do it, with a family time of one sort or another. So, I think that, but they do carve out some time. That's their way of doing it.
So I'm going to start to wind down. Two-part question. The first one will be the flip side. What are you pessimistic about right now as you look toward the future? And on the other end, I'm going to ask you, what are you optimistic about? But right now, what's worrying you?
I think that actually divisiveness in societies is a really bad thing. And I really hope that, there'll be more. Of course, I'm in the public relations field, as I said, and I started building bridges. Is really important to me. Finding common ground. I really hope, whether it's divisiveness within societies or divisiveness between countries or whatever it is, I think it hurts everybody. So that is something personally that I worry about and feel uncomfortable about. And on the positive side, I think that the opportunity for amazing innovation and this question of really building a whole new society that's totally optimistic, while recognizing threats and challenges, because everything wonderful has threats and challenges that come associated with it. But it's really not, it's the hope rather than the fear that actually I think is, we should be able to manage going forward.
And the thing that you're most optimistic about?
That's the potential for innovation. It's the potential for really dramatic, life-changing innovation. And I'm looking forward to my autonomous car.
And last question. If you were writing the headline for this, what would that headline be? Our discussion. What would the headline be? I have a feeling innovation is going to be in there. But and what is the most important thing you would want people who are listening to this podcast and watching this on our platform to draw from it?
Because so if it's a headline, I would say seize the opportunities from disruptive innovation. And that would entail mindset and culture. It would entail changing the way you look at your competition, and it would change the way you look at your employee base and how you innovate with young people.